I'm Carrie Asby, and I'm sitting with Simon Naylor, who is the conservation manager at AndBeyond Phinda Private Game Reserve, where you run and manage a very successful conservation organization. And you have some wonderful achievements, and actually I'm not going to go into them too deep right now, but there's two of them that I wanted to bring up, and that you are the director of StopRhinoPoaching.com or .org, I guess, and Zululand Conservation Fund. And both of those focus on security and conservation of rhinos, which brings us into this conversation right now. I didn't know about rhino dehorning until I actually volunteered with you in May. And it was a profound experience of witnessing a rhino, what symbolized a rhino, and having it removed in order to save it. And I want to talk a little more about that. How does one come up with this idea of dehorning a rhino?
Yeah, hi Kerry. Nice to chat and see you again. Yeah, how does one come up with it? It's put it this way, it's a decision that's not taken lightly. I think most people that sort of are following rhino conservation or have been involved in conservation in general will know that for a long time now, rhinos, certainly in Africa, but in Asia as well, have been under a lot of pressure. For centuries, people have been using rhino horn, mostly in the Far East, China and Vietnam, for medicinal use and other sort of other things, other sort of ornaments and things like that. And sort of Yemen, which is sort of Asia, North Africa, in the 80s and 90s, they were using rhino horn for dagger handles in their sort of customary attire, etc. So for sort of the last sort of decades, people have been using rhino horn for various things. But, in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, the spike, there's been a really dramatic spike in rhino poaching, the killing illegally of rhinos for their horn. And most of it has been driven by use in the Far East, to China and Vietnam. And so we came to the decision of removing rhino horn purely because the pressure here at Phinda got too great, really. We started to lose rhino. They started to be poached at a sort of a higher number than we would have liked, even after putting security measures in place, a lot of measures. And really the idea behind it is not new. It was something that was done back in the 80s and 90s in Namibia and Zimbabwe and a few other places, but in South Africa hadn't really been considered up until sort of fairly recently. So we took the decision at the end of 2015, and we started in 2016. So we've been going for about 5 or 6 years now. Back then, very few places were dehorning or trimming or taking or removing rhino horn. And really the idea behind it is to sort of change the risk reward ratio, that any poacher or thief in general weighs up before they commit a crime. They look at the reward and what are the risks that come with obtaining that reward, and then they make their decision based on that. And unfortunately, certainly in South Africa and most other places, the reward is very, very high. As I mentioned, the demand is very high for the horn, and the price per kilogram on the black market is exceptionally high. It's hundreds of thousands of rands and dollars per kilogram, and the risks for poachers or the thieves or the syndicates are very low. So it's a very lucrative sort of criminal business. So our thinking and the idea behind it is to is to remove the horn, well, as much as the horn as possible safely, and you can do that with rhinos, uh, and try and sort of change that risk reward ratio, and to try and sort of disincentivize, or you know, make sort of poachers think twice before they enter the park to shoot a rhino, because we still have the risks. You know, we've got security and we've got other measures in place, but when you've got such a high value sort of commodity like rhinos, and they're really hard to protect, actually, especially against well organized, informed criminals, you hopefully tip the scales in your favor, if that makes sense. And fortunately, rhino horn grows back. It's like our fingernails and hair, so we remove it very carefully, you know, and it sort of starts to grow back, and hopefully that just sort of buys us time. And if you do enough rhinos in your population, you can tip the scales, in your favor. So that's really the sort of theory and the thinking behind it.
Well, it has. I mean, from what I follow you on Instagram, the success for Phinda is doing really well. And then
Yeah.
on the other side of the hill, they're struggling right now, because they don't have the same practice.
Yeah, so it's definitely worked for us. And look, dehorning or trimming rhino horns is not the only thing that works. It's you have to do it in combination with other measures. If you didn't do the other measures on its own, it might not work as successfully. And certainly for us in this area of Zululand, South Africa, we've had great success with it. Our incursions, that's sort of the number of times or incidents of poachers wanting to come into the park has dropped off dramatically. And our sort of poaching rate, or number of rhinos that were killed, dropped off dramatically as well, to almost nothing. Whereas other places that have similar sort of, in this area, unfortunately, there's other parks that have got similar densities and numbers, have not had such great success, and they they've got rhinos still with horns on, but at the same time, they might not have the same number of field rangers or same intensity of security as us. So but certainly for us, the impact of the dehorning has been dramatic, and in other places as well that have been dehorning, they've seen a huge drop off of poaching rates and incidents. And so it definitely is a measure that, together with other measures, and and the other thing is, you've got to keep doing it as well. We've been doing it now for 6 years. You can't just sort of do it once and then leave it. As I mentioned, the horn grows, so as it grows, it will attract poachers, as they see that, oh, there's a whole bunch of rhinos with horns on again, they're going to try their luck. So you've got to keep doing it, and you've got to have other measures in place, and you've got to add to those measures as well, because unfortunately the numbers of rhinos in South Africa certainly are dropping. And so wherever there's rhinos, every day the pressure on those remaining rhinos with horns gets greater and greater. So our efforts you can't just sort of keep the same effort. You've got to keep adding to the effort that you put in, and taking the horns off.
Reinventing every time.
Yeah.
Would you mind going into some of what are the other efforts that you're going into, I should say?
Well, yeah, sure. The greatest risk that we face is obviously, and it's been proven and shown, is that poachers will contact or try and contact and make use of staff that are working here internally. Before they enter the park, they do a lot of homework, and unfortunately they will make contact with staff inside, and basically corrupt staff, and either or try and get information on where the rhinos are, where the field rangers are, etc., etc. What are what are the measures, the protective measures, like any poacher, you know, any thief or criminal, you know, before they rob a bank, they're going to do their homework. You know, they've got to understand the security measures in place. So in our case, with Rhino, they will contact staff inside and get an inside line basically. And so so we've got to try and sort of build up a measure against that. And one of the things we do is provide rewards. So we provide really substantial rewards to staff or members of staff or people in our neighboring communities if they have information or they come across any incident that might take place. They must sort of provide the information, you know, and we'll pay, you know, pay rewards for that. The other thing is we do integrity testing. So that's basically polygraph testing or similar to polygraph testing. So all of our staff go through sort of testing every year or 2 years, and that seems to have sort of reduced the incentive of our staff to collaborating with poachers, you know. And we've had 3 or 4 sort of rounds of testing in the last 6 or 7 years, and that's really shown and been a deterrent to staff getting involved. You know, it's you know, people unfortunately are lured by sort of money, offers of money and other incentives to get involved. And if you don't have that measure in place, it's very easy to provide information and not get caught, you know. It's something that unfortunately many staff, so where there's poaching, there's often sort of internal involvement, and so you've got to sort of create a measure against that. So that's what we've done. And then we have, you know, deterrents like lots of field rangers, well-equipped field rangers, well-trained. We've got capabilities of canines to react to incidents, aerial patrols, aeroplanes, helicopters, specialized equipment, you know, to assist the field rangers to, you know, try and detect poachers at night or during the day as well. And then visitor access controls are also very important. You know, people coming in and out the park, you know, we need to know who's coming in and out, and you know, and making sure that that's a deterrent as well, because that's a risk as well, people coming in and shooting rhinos inside the park. So that's just a small sort of number. And then obviously education and development of communities around us. You know, we spend a lot of time and effort and money in creating sort of partnerships with communities, and they are less likely to sort of poach when they feel you know, the park benefits them directly and indirectly. And so if you've got communities that sort of perceive the park as beneficial, they are less likely to sort of come and poach from the park. So those are just sort of a few things that we do to try and deter and keep rhinos alive.
It's complex,
Yeah.
but you're also, I remember talking to Matt, the habitat manager. He was saying it's not just the guy that's in the community that's trying to get money to feed his family, that it's now the poachers are well funded, almost like an army. Like you're up against some really high quality thieves. It's not just and that's a battle.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, obviously, due to the sort of high value of the rhino horn, it has attracted sort of well organized syndicates or criminals. You know, these are individuals that, you know, are also sort of dealing in drugs and arms and human trafficking, and so these people are well resourced, you know, you know, their tentacles and networks sort of extend deep into law enforcement and the courts and politicians and things like that. So unfortunately, we're not up against sort of petty criminals, you know, that do this, you know, ad hoc, or you know, these are well organized sort of syndicates that also operate overseas. You know, you've got sort of mafia type people involved, and so yeah, it's very challenging, and because obviously with their connections and their resources, they can also corrupt a lot of sort of government structures like police and the courts and the magistrates and things like that. So it's like any corrupted system. It's hard to deter poachers when they are operating in that environment.
Well, and it costs money. So it's just a
Correct.
segue, because one thing that I learned about what you guys do at Phinda is the guests who come, they can actually experience a conservation experience. They can help with a rhino dehorning. They can help take
Yeah.
a tracking collar of an elephant. They can help, walk with pangolins. I think this is a brilliant idea. Like, get the guests to actually fund it.
Yeah.
And so how important is that, is having the guests? How important is it their support?
Well, it's obviously very important. I mean, we kind of we wouldn't do it unless we felt that there was a benefit to both parties, and I think for the reserve the benefits are that our efforts and conservation costs money, especially, for example, rhino security. I mean, just a dehorning costs thousands of dollars, because you have to contract in a helicopter and a vet and all this sort of thing. And so it wouldn't be sustainable if we didn't have sort of the involvement of guests, for example, or NGOs funding. And that's the other thing, we with things like COVID, put great strain on our resources. And so, by having guests involved, it helps us to, ensure the sustainability of all the different projects like the dehorning. And then I think, people like to get involved, they want to be hands-on. And I do believe that it adds to the education and awareness of sort of what's happening on the ground. And when people do a dehorning and they get to touch a rhino, and they kind of leave a lot sort of more educated and have a lot more awareness of the sort of the plight of the rhino or the plight of the pangolin, etc. And they the decisions they make when they go home are much more, I guess, they're better informed, and they can make better decisions. And I do think it sort of leads into other spheres of their life. People go back to New York, and they might change the way they live, and to become more environmentally friendly, etc. So just a small thing, for example, can help a rhino, but it can change the outlook and the perception of someone's life, and I guess help the planet in a bigger picture. But certainly for us, it benefits us because we can get a lot more done, and it makes our projects more sustainable. And then I think for people that participate, for many people I've seen it's sort of life-changing experiences. They they would never touch a rhino or see a pangolin or get involved in sort of one of these projects, and it makes them feel good. I think that's what it is. It sort of has a feel good factor to it, but it's genuine. I think for us it's really important that these experiences are genuine. They're not there to just make people feel good, or to make people feel good, or to make money. It's got to be, there's got to be a purpose to it. And I think that's really important. That is, that people that partake in these experiences understand the purpose of it. It's not just for them, it's not just for us. There's a link between it, and there's a genuine sort of purpose to it. And that's why I think people keep coming back to do it, or it's become very popular, and yeah.
Well, it had a profound experience on me. And that's actually
Yeah.
why I'm integrating it into the wellness retreat. I've had the idea for coming down to Phinda, bringing people down to have wildlife conservation experience and wellness and merge them together. And I'm including the rhino dehorning because it does have such an impact. And we are from nature. Humans are animals. People forget that. And
Yeah.
connecting with nature, you are connecting with yourself. And that connection, it does affect the individual, the outlook towards the individual, but then their outlook they have towards the rest of the world. And so it was important to me to bring that into to the experience with my guest. And so actually, let's go back, if you don't mind, because I like the way you explain the procedure, because people are like, oh, you're taking away the rhino's horn. And it's actually a very gentle and mindful experience. And if you could explain a little bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously great care is taken to, reduce the stress and ensure that there's no risk or little risk to the animal. The animal's welfare is paramount. And so every time we sort of immobilize or dart a rhino, we've got to consider a whole bunch of factors. The heat is one, the terrain, the animal itself, so everything that we do is well considered in terms of the animal's welfare. But removing a rhino's horn is obviously a stressful procedure for the rhino. But we've learned to do it in such a way that within an hour it's done, and the animal wakes up afterwards and sort of is none the wiser. Obviously it doesn't have a horn on, or it has most of its horn removed. We always leave a little bit of horn left. There's always a bit of horn left because we have to, we can't take the entire horn off. But the procedure, we make sure that the guests who are participating fully understand what they're doing, so there's a briefing beforehand, that takes sort of about 15-20 minutes. It's very important. I think people understand really what are they doing, why they're doing it, how they're going to do it. There's a lot of safety considerations that we've got to mention for the rhino and the people that are involved. And then the animals that we select, we always choose animals that have got sort of either a big horn or a lot of regrowth. And we find those animals with a helicopter. We do all of our immobilizations and dartings from a helicopter, and there's a bunch of reasons for that, which we always we talk about beforehand. But I mean, for me to explain it to you now would take me sort of 5-10 minutes. But just in brief, the procedure is kind of it's complicated, but it's for us it's quite easy now because we've got a lot of experience. We use experienced pilots, experienced vets. Our ground team has done it so many times. We've done hundreds before. And the darting takes place from the helicopter, as I've mentioned. The animal is sort of down, and in about sort of 8 minutes, it stops running, and we get it onto its chest. And then we monitoring the vital signs all the time, the breathing, the heart rate, the temperature, and the blood oxygenation, the blood pressure as well. So that's closely monitored all the time. And then we remove the horn with a chainsaw, and then remove all the sort of remaining pieces of the horn with a hoof grinder, just to get as much horn off as possible. But we've got to be very careful that we don't cut into the sort of growth cuticle of the rhino, where the horn grows out. So we're very, very careful on that. And then we take a bunch of measurements, horn measurements and body measurements. We take a bunch of samples for DNA, so we take skin and hair and horn shavings and blood. And the entire procedure is about 30-40 minutes. That's how long it takes to get that all done. And there's always time at the end, as I said, for questions and touching the rhino and photographs and things like that. But the main purpose is to remove the horn. And that sort of takes us to about sort of 40, 45, 50 minutes. And then there's a drug, the drugs that we use, there's a full reversal, and so we wake the rhino up with that reversal drug, and it's standing, you know, in a couple of minutes after that, and then it runs off. You know, it's like it's a fairly simple, quick procedure, which we've done hundreds of times before. It's not to say that things don't always go to plan, but you know, we are always prepared for the eventuality of, you know, the unpredictability, because there are you know, there's things that can happen, and we just sort of deal with them as we go along, you know. But touch wood, you know, we've had no sort of major incidents, and generally it's pretty risk-free, you know, for the rhinos. And I think the beauty of it is that the horn grows back. You know, if we decide to not cut the horn again, it'll just grow back, you know, in 2, 3, 4 years, it'll be back to what it should be naturally. But I think for all of us, you know, the main advantage is that it just increases or reduces the risk of that animal getting shot. And there's no doubt about it. You know, it's been proven time and time again that, you know, if we can take as much horn off as possible, as often as possible, we give that animal a much better chance. And it's quite a sad thing. It's quite an emotional thing. I think for all of us, it's not lost on us that, you know, we're removing this amazing animal's kind of essence, you know, the essence of it, you know. And but unfortunately the current circumstances sort of require it, you know. And you know, if we didn't do it, you know, our population, all of our rhinos would be under great threat, and we'd certainly we'd be losing rhinos. They'd be getting shot for sure, there's no doubt. So it's an unnecessary evil at this stage, and I think we all hope that at some stage in the future we might not, well, we don't have to do it.
I did read somewhere, and you may have changed your position on this, that you were in favor of legalizing horn trade. Are you still in that position? And could you give us a little more idea of what that would look like?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting debate, that one, you know. And it's one that I think changes all the time, you know. The circumstances change all the time. I to be honest, I'd prefer to you know, I've got my personal sort of views on it. But you know, the company that I represent in Phinda, who I represent, I think are of the view that, you know, a legalized trade could in the future benefit rhinos. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty at this time on that. I think the biggest uncertainty is the end user sort of market. You know, we really just don't understand what drives that market. There's definitely pros and cons to legalizing a trade. I think one of the sort of cons is what impact would that have on other range states, you know, countries like Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, etc., that have less rhinos than South Africa, and might not be in favor of a legalized horn trade. You know, what would that do to you know, to conservation efforts there, and the threat of the rhinos there. So there's a lot of pros and cons, and I think it's something that we just don't understand at this stage, you know. Especially it's not like drugs or prostitution, where we know, you know, how they're being used in you know, in the user countries. The use of horn in the Far East is still very much clouded in secrecy, because it's a black market trade. You know, people are just, they just don't know what it's getting used for, and how it's getting used. And so look, what I can say is that the current sort of situation is not working. You know, the ban of you know, of the trade or the trade of rhino horn itself under CITES is not working. You know, the sort of principle of trying to stop the trade, you know, using the traditional methods of law enforcement and justice in the courts is really not working. You know, I think, but that's because you've got, you know, criminal syndicates involved in the trade. I mean, they're trading illegally already. You know, there is a trade; it's just illegal. And you know, creating laws and measures against that are currently not working. So,
Yeah.
look, it's not to say that you know, it could work. You know, legalized trade could work. It could swing the you know, swing the situation around. You know, it might even be a case of supplying free horn. You know, that might work as well. You know, in other words, you know, we supply the market of free stockpiled rhino horn, but I think it's no one really knows what impact it'll have on the remaining animals. And so I think at this stage, certainly our position, our stance is not to trade, you know, not to propose a legalized trade. But that could change in the future. You know, it's a really difficult situation.
It's complex. Yeah.
Very complex.
In
Yeah.
theory, it sounds great, you know, take it off the black market and put it on, kind of like the marijuana situation in the United States, get it off the streets and monitor it.
Yeah.
But that's a weed. We're talking about rhinos here, and it's much more complex than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what has been one of your greatest learning lessons during this experience of rhino dehorning?
Yeah, so with regards to rhino dehorning, certainly I would say the impact that it's had, you know, it's had a really positive impact. I think you know, when we started, we were really not sure what sort of impact it would have, you know, on both the animals and you know, and the people that work with them, you know. And you know, as I said, when we decided to do this, very few places were doing it at such a large scale as well. You know, we were one of the first reserves that started to dehorn, and also at the time, one of the largest dehorning exercises, you know, and we really didn't know what sort of impact it would have on the rhinos themselves. And I think that's been the greatest learning, is that, and that's, to be honest, why others have followed. I think, you know, it's always hard to be the first or one of the first. It's much easier to follow, and especially when it is proving to be successful. So I think the greatest learning is that, yeah, I think we made the right decision, and the way that we've gone about it and done it has been it's been a massive learning curve. And just the positive impact that it's had on the people that have joined us, you know. And it's created a lot of awareness. A lot of, you know, a lot of people now know more about the plight of rhinos than before. So just having people involved, you know, has gone a long way to creating, yeah, greater awareness and support, and you know, both financially and just generally support, you know. And then the rhinos themselves, you know, we've seen very little negative impact on the rhinos themselves. You know, we've obviously, we do it very carefully, and we've learnt along the way. You know, we might have not done certain things correctly, but we've learnt, yeah. And I think just through our learnings, lots of other people have started to do it, and I think we've saved a lot of rhinos from it. So I would say that's been the greatest learning, is you know, we've now learned to do it better and save rhinos.
Yeah, we could, I mean, one voice in a room isn't very loud, but when more people come together, that voice becomes really loud, and then that's when the change happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add? Like, is there a question you would wish I'd asked, or anything you just want to share with people who are listening right now?
Yeah, not really. I think just, if you can, you know, can support, you know, get involved, and you know, I think, even though I think people sort of often feel they can't help. I think they don't have to be here to help. It's just, I think, rather help others help, or if you can, yeah, join us and get involved. And I do think I think we've got a long road ahead. For example, we've got many years ahead of us to try and keep these animals alive, and we really do need all the help we can. And so yeah, I mean, rhinos, certainly white rhino numbers are really in sharp decline. And yeah, so every little bit helps, basically. And so if people support you and join on these wellnesses and come and and join us on these rhino dehornings, it would be a great help. And if they don't, then they can help in other ways, just creating awareness and publicity, and or providing financial support to NGOs and people that are giving support. That's even great as well. So yeah.
It seems like the money is the most important right now. Like the funding of it all is really crucial, because it's so elaborate what you have to do, and you need the money. And
yeah, it's costly. So that goes a long way.
Yes. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you
Yeah,
so
you too.
If people want to follow you on Instagram, it's Simon James Naylor. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, that's the best way to keep tabs on the work that you're doing. And other than that, I will, yeah, I guess I'll see you soon. I definitely will be trying to come back down to Phinda as soon as I possibly can. So
Great. We look forward to it.
okay, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
and it's been great to chat.